Coming up, the NBA's first over-under win projections are out. Where do they project the Nets to finish? I'll answer that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. On today's show, I'm going to be breaking down where the Nets are projected to finish in the first over-under win projections for this coming season. I'll analyze whether the sportsbooks have it right and how the number could reflect Brooklyn's goals. And these numbers came out last week, first over-under win projections for the 2025-26 campaign. And they pegged the Nets to be at 20.5 wins was the number that FanDuel Sportsbook and several other sportsbooks had it set at. And that was tied with the Washington Wizards for the second worst number in the league. The Utah Jazz are last in the league, so only team behind the Nets and Wizards, and they are at 18.5 wins. And my first reaction was, this is about where I expected the Nets to come in on the opening win projections. It's one win higher or two wins higher, depending on what point you looked at the number last season. I think the lowest number that the Nets had entering last season was 18.5 wins, which was the lowest in, I think, 30 years for the Nets organization. And that was crushed by them during that campaign. And last year when we came in and it was set at 18.5 wins at one point, I remember thinking that felt really low for the talent that the Nets had on that roster. And I remember thinking that it was probably set with the expectation that it was going to be a tanking season for the Nets. They were going to have that agenda, and they were going to move off some of their talented veterans sooner rather than later, whether it be Dennis Schroeder, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith. They were going to get off those guys and prioritize stacking losses. So they set it at 18.5. And then the Nets opened the year 9-10. They're, almost halfway. They are halfway to that 18.5 number, a few weeks into the season. And then they clear that number with 2 months left in the regular season. They got to 19 wins, and they had a little bit to say about that. And I think a lot of that had to do to them holding on to those veterans like Dennis Schroeder, DFS, and obviously Cam Johnson longer than the sportsbooks probably had anticipated. So this year, the sportsbooks bump it up from 18.5 to 20.5. So it's a couple wins higher. But I think that is a reaction to them being so off last year while still understanding what the goals are and what the influx of young talent and young draft picks is going to look like for Brooklyn this coming season. So 20.5, third worst or tied for the second worst in the NBA this season. I think that's about where I would expect it to be, where I did expect it to be for the Nets entering these first numbers coming out. And I think it's a number that I would expect them to hover right around. And there's several reasons for that. And when you look at what I just outlined, the Nets jumping out to that hot start, that 9-10 start last year, and just clearing that win projection super early with 2 months left in the season. A lot of that was stemming from that hot start. And who led that hot start? It was Dennis Schroeder and Cam Johnson were the two main contributors to that hot start last year. And really in the beginning of the year, mostly Schroeder, because Schroeder was the guy handling the ball. He was the guy leading the Nets offense. Even at points, he was the guy leading the Nets defense, pressuring 94 feet and doing a lot of those things that Jordi Fernandez had been talking about entering his first year as an NBA head coach. And you look at just taking away Schroeder's ball handling, what he did at the beginning of that year, because I think a lot of people didn't expect Dennis Schroeder to perform the way that he did at the beginning of that year. That was a career best start for Schroeder. He was averaging like 19 points per game, was shooting near 50, 40, 90, if not above, was probably at 6 or 7 assists, was keeping the turnovers low. He was really just playing like an elite level. We got 3 weeks of that season where Dennis Schroeder looked like one of the best point guards in the league. It was not an exaggeration to say that. So when you had that level of shot creation, facilitation, three-point shooting, veteran ball handling, leading the offense with some of the pieces the Nets had around him with, Cam Johnson and DFS as veteran wings, with Nick Claxton at center, with Day'Ron Sharpe playing, or Day'Ron Sharpe missed the beginning of the year, but with some of the guys that they had as supporting pieces around Schroeder and around that high-level veteran ball handling, you were going to get some wins. You also had them just playing extremely hard under a first-year head coach, Jordy Fernandez. So now you take out Dennis Schroeder, that veteran ball handling. Even later in the year, the Nets replaced him with D'Angelo Russell. So really at every point in this season, or for the majority of the season, the Nets had a veteran ball handler in the lineup, a veteran point guard in the lineup, a table setter, a guy who could get things organized. And now you look at them taking away Dennis Schroeder, D'Angelo Russell obviously departing and going to the Dallas Mavericks. Who is the veteran point guard, the veteran ball handler on this roster? Cam Thomas, I guess you could say, he's obviously unsigned and restricted free agency, but if you bring him back, he is that veteran ball handler that I guess you can lean on, fifth year in the league. I don't think anybody considers Cam like a seasoned vet, but that guy who has some experience and has some shot creation ability. But outside of that, if you're looking at true point guards and who's going to be setting up and, getting this team organized and looking at how they're going to be comprised offensively, it's rookies. I mean, they brought in, obviously, Yegor Diomin. They brought in Nolan Traore, Ben Sarath. And when you have three rookie ball handlers or three rookie point guards as the only point guards on the roster, that is a recipe for some chaos. A little bit, obviously, more of a developmental track with turning the page, making 5 first-round picks, an NBA record in this year's draft, and prioritizing really committing to the full rebuild and a little bit of a youth movement and a build through the draft for the first time since the team has been in Brooklyn. When you have rookie ball handlers like that, you have guys like that trying to lead an offense. Traditionally, they struggle a lot with the transition from college or international play, wherever they were, to the NBA level. It is a massive step up. I think for Yegor Diomin, you saw a little bit of that at Summer League as a ball handler. You saw similar struggles from Ben Sarath and Nolan Traore in certain areas. And when you have those guys trying to do that and being leaned upon potentially heavily as guys who are going to be handling the ball a lot in an offense, I think that that's a recipe for some losses. And I think that that's going to lend itself from a slower start than what we saw from the Nets last season. And I think it will have them kind of in this range of being towards the bottom of that win column from the jump, as opposed to last year when they started out 9-10 and they were in the middle of the pack. And in terms of the lottery odds in the tank race, they were really playing catch up for the rest of the year. I do not think that is going to be the case this season. And, with those rookie ball handlers coming in, them getting reps is going to be important. So I expect the Nets, maybe those guys will spend a certain of the draft picks will spend some time in the G League next season, but I would expect the ball handlers to be getting a lot of reps with the Nets because you have that luxury this season. You have no expectations. You're a team that's coming in. I think a lot of the fans are bought in the developmental track that they're on and building through the draft for the first time in this Brooklyn era. So getting those guys reps and not really having to worry about the wins and the losses so much because you are mired in the beginning of a rebuild, that is somewhat of a luxury. And I would expect the Nets to take advantage of that and give these guys those reps. So when you look at the Nets getting rid of Dennis Schroeder, getting rid of D'Angelo Russell, or not getting rid of D'Angelo Russell, just departing and bringing them in and replacing them with rookies, obviously, I think Schroeder and D'Lo to the rookies is going to be a downgrade in terms of production, in terms of just composure and the things that you want to be able to play competent offensive basketball. And then you look at the other positions, you got rid of Cam Johnson. You brought in Michael Porter Jr. I think, a lot of people probably think that they're in a similar tier of players, but you have to remember that Cam Johnson had a career best season last year. He was playing at an elite level. He was at 19 points, 3 or 4 assists, 50, 40, 90 for the year. Do I expect Michael Porter Jr. to play at that level? Michael Porter Jr. could have a great season and still not play at that level. So I think that the production that we see from MPJ most likely is going to be a downgrade from what we saw from CJ last year. And then you look at Dorian Finney-Smith being sent out the door and Terrence Mann coming in, replacing him as a salary dump as that other veteran. I think people would consider that a downgrade as well. So just across the board on the roster, there are downgrades. There could be some upgrades with guys getting healthy. And what is the depth chart ultimately going to look like? And what can fans expect to see rotationally? I'll touch on that after a quick break. But before that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever wish managing money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Guys, when I started using Monarch Money, I realized all the different things that you can spend on. Monarch lets you keep track of it all in one place so you can make sure that you're meeting your financial goals. You have a lot of subscriptions, guys. You can track all of those. You can wave through the ones you want and don't want to make sure that you're not spending too much monthly. Having everything in one app made it so much easier to manage my money day to day. It really helped with meeting everything that I wanted to do. Guys, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the NBA's first over-under win projections for the 2025-26 season. The Nets coming in at 20.5 wins is their projection. That is tied with the Washington Wizards for the second worst in the league, only ahead of the Utah Jazz, who are at 18.5 wins. And when you look at Brooklyn's depth chart, I just outlined the kind of shift from the veteran experience they have, particularly in the ball handling department, to the young guys. It's not too hard to see why the Nets obviously came in around that number. You look at the depth chart of what's going to be this season. Obviously, it could change. We don't know what the lineups and the rotations are going to be. The only thing we do know is that Jordi Fernandez said that it's going to be on him to get all of the rookies reps. A lot of people were surprised that the Nets made 5 first-round picks, because how do you develop all those guys at one time? How do you get them all minutes? Nobody's ever done it before, made 5 first-round picks in one draft. Nobody's ever made more than 3. So Jordi Fernandez said it's going to be on him. He said he's most likely going to be a 10-man rotation this coming season. I wouldn't be surprised if they went deeper than 10-man, 10 guys on a lot of nights. But when you look at just the projected starting lineup for this team, I think right now you could probably put it at Yegor Dioman, Cam Thomas, assuming he's back, which everybody expects him to be, Terrence Mann, Michael Porter Jr., Nick Claxton. I think that's the 5 that just makes the most sense, from having some blend, obviously, of the youth with Dioman in with some experienced guys. I think that there will be a lot of shakeup in how these rotations work. So I said Dioman, Thomas, Mann, Porter Jr., Claxton. That is not a high-level starting lineup. There is not a lot of shot creation in that lineup. If you're looking at what Yegor, his struggles are as a ball handler and what we saw from him at BYU and at Summer League, the knock on him was that he obviously was a guy who struggled handling the ball, struggled handling ball pressure. We saw that at Summer League. Doesn't create a lot of separation as a dribbler, needs to get a lot stronger and add a lot of muscle to his frame to be able to compete with these NBA level defenders and the physicality that they're going to bring. So he's not a shot creator. You have Cam Thomas is going to be shouldering an extremely heavy burden. And then you have Terrence Mann, who's not a shot creator. Nick Claxton's not a shot creator. And Michael Porter Jr. is kind of a swing guy where he's going to be playing off the ball a lot, obviously. He's going to get a lot of three-point looks off the catch. But we also heard from him at Summer League about how he's excited to expand his game and try to do some things. And the implication, obviously, being there that that's going to be more shot creation, probably more on-the-ball looks, more pick-and-roll sets potentially, trying to do some of the stuff that we didn't see him doing in Denver with Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray dominating the ball-handling responsibilities there. But still, even if Porter Jr. can improve a little bit, you're getting Cam Thomas, a guy who is an elite shot creator, but is not an elite playmaker whatsoever. You have him, and then you have Michael Porter Jr. as the 2 guys that are really going to be leaned heavily upon offensively to be offensive engines. That's not going to cut it. That's not going to be a recipe for success, in my opinion. And then you look beyond that starting 5 and at the bench, the only really proven guys that you have, I feel like, who are going to be rotation guys from day one are probably Day'Ron Sharpe, Noah Clowney, Zaire Williams, all interesting players, I think, but not shot creators either, any of those guys. And then beyond that, if you look at who the rest of the shot creation is going to be outside of the starting 5, you have Nolan Traore, Ben Saraf, Danny Wolf, more rookies. So the Nets are just going to be at an extreme shot creation deficiency. And from the bench perspective, I think that their bench is probably going to struggle a lot, because this team is not deep in terms of shot creators or veteran guys who have done it, especially in the ball handling department, and feel comfortable doing that. It's just a lot of youth. It's a lot of inexperience. So when you're turning away from those non-Cam Thomas MPJ minutes, the guys that you're going to be leaning on to handle the ball and do a lot of those things are either rookies who are inexperienced, or they're guys who maybe have a little bit of experience but aren't super high level. When you talk about Keon Johnson, maybe Tyrese Martin gets in there, they're still going to be fighting for the back end roster spots with the Nets. I'm going to touch on that on an episode later this week. But outside of Cam Thomas, and MPJ, there's just not a lot of shot creation. When you get to those second units, I have a feeling that unlike last season, I think this Nets team is probably going to struggle a lot comparatively to some of these other teams, because I think those second units are just going to feature a lot of youth, a lot of inexperience for this Nets team. And I think that it's going to be good because you're going to get a lot of guys minutes and things along those lines, but it's not going to be a recipe for success. I also think outside of just the rotation conversation, obviously a lot of this over under win total and where the Nets are set this season is, stemming from what their goals are ostensibly. So you think that last season we saw them come into the year, we knew that, or we had a strong indication that it was a tank season. It was going to be a draft position emphasis on where they were going to finish. They came out hot. They eventually did place a little bit more of an emphasis on their draft positioning, trading Dennis Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith. They traded Dennis Schroeder the first day they were able to, when the free agents from the past season were eligible to be traded on December 15th. They got Anthony Melton back, who was the guy who had signed the prior year, because they were emphasizing getting back expiring contracts. So they moved off him as soon as they can. They waited a little bit longer for DFS. Then later in the season, you saw them resting some guys and kind of putting a little bit more urgency on trying to get that draft position back to where you probably hoped it was going to be. But they fell to the 6th best odds, obviously, and then the 8th best pick this year. With where they are compared to, when they made the trade with the Rockets last year, you look at them giving up those Phoenix picks to the Rockets and getting back their own picks this year and next, last year and this year. They finished with the 8th pick this year. The Rockets finished with the 10th pick, which obviously went back to the Suns in the KD trade. But they only went up 2 spots on that trade, and they gave up what was essentially 4 picks for 2. So if you only got a 2-spot jump in that draft last year, this coming season, you are going to hopefully try to be doing it right in terms of the tanking, and you're going to try to get your pick as high as possible and really justify what you gave up in that Rockets trade with giving up those 4 picks for 2. So this year, I think there should be an expectation that they're going to go at this a little bit, I don't know if you would say more aggressively or a little bit more of the right way in terms of, what is maximizing your chances of having the highest pick possible. Last year, they didn't necessarily do that. I think a lot of that was stemming from them trying to get back expiring contracts and the trades for guys like Schroeder and DFS, as they ultimately did. But this year, they bring in 5 rookies. They don't bring in a veteran ball handler. Obviously, there's still time in the offseason left. They have $22 million in cap space left. We'll see what they do with it. But not having a veteran point guard on the roster, to me, is really a telltale sign that this is a developmental year. That's where the emphasis is. And we're expecting those guys to get a lot of minutes and work through the kinks. And whether they win or whether they lose, that's not really the emphasis. The emphasis is development. And in turn, obviously, draft position. So I think that is probably baked into this 20.5 number as well. So while Nets fans, I think, should be ready for a developmental season, which will mean a lot of losses, I think that it's going to be a lot more fun to watch than it was this past season, which was not an exciting year whatsoever. Why do I think it's going to be more fun? I'll touch on that after a quick break. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the NBA's first over-under win projections for the 2025-26 season. Brooklyn coming in at 20.5, second worst in the league, only 2 wins higher than the Utah Jazz, who are the worst in the league. And I said that while I think that this number is pretty on the nail, I would expect the Nets to be somewhere around it when it's all said and done. I would expect the Nets to be towards the bottom of the league in wins to maximize their draft positioning and really take advantage of that, getting their pick back in that trade with the Houston Rockets, unlike last year when they only had a 2-spot advantage from where that Phoenix pick that they gave up landed. I think that this is going to be a fun season in regard, especially, comparatively to what we saw last year. And the reason being, this is the first true developmental build through the draft type season, that we've seen in the Brooklyn era. Like, we've seen them obviously draft guys and bring them in and try to develop them, but never to this degree. Since we've been, in Brooklyn, the Nets have not made a lottery pick. Yegor Dioman, first lottery pick since 2010, when the Nets obviously missed out on John Wall and took Derek Favors. Then Derek Favors got traded 35 games into his rookie season for Darren Williams. So since the Nets' last lottery pick, Derek Favors, it was immediately after that the pivot to D. Will, and then Joe Johnson, and then KG and Paul Pierce in that era. Then obviously imploded, went into the rebuild, the spunky rebuild team, and then it went back into KD, Kyrie, Harden. Since that 2010, which the Nets never even saw that pick through with Derek Favors and building through the draft that way. Since then, they've never done it. It's all gone quick fix, rebuild, another quick fix. Now they're back into the rebuild cycle, and they've really, unlike those past cycles, committed to the rebuild and building through the draft by making 5 first-round picks in this draft. So all of those guys, Dioman, Traore, Saraf, Drake Powell, Danny Wolf, I would expect them all to get playing time. Is it going to be easy to get all of them minutes? No. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of them play some stretches in the G League next year, but I would expect them all also to get stretches in the NBA. And from a Nets fan perspective, regardless of the wins or losses, that is going to be exciting because you're seeing young, homegrown guys that you have hope can turn into high-level rotation pieces, guys who were taken high in the draft in some of the cases. Dioman and Traore are the highest draft picks that Sean Marks has made in his time as GM since 2016. So you're seeing something that, as a Nets fan, a lot of you haven't seen in Dioman's case, really ever. Like the Nets, we haven't seen many lottery picks in the last 2 decades. You're seeing that. You're seeing all of these other guys who I think would have gone higher. You have 19, 22, 26, 27 in the last 4 picks, but this was a high-level draft and considered one of the deepest drafts of the last 2 decades. So in other drafts, those guys go a lot higher. Where does Nolan Traore go in the 2024 draft, and how does that change the narrative surrounding who he is as a player? So having all of those guys on the court at one time or on the team together at one time and getting to manage and keep tabs on their development, you're going to be looking for certain things that you want to see. And it's going to go past the wins and losses. The wins and losses are not going to be a concern, really. It's going to be a concern for some people monitoring where the Nets are in the draft lottery standings. But from the regard of worrying about it, it's a luxury to not have to worry about that this coming season and get to lean into the development of drafted guys in a way that the Nets really haven't done since moving to Brooklyn. So I think you look at doing that as opposed to doing what we did last season, which was the conversation last season was all just surrounding the draft pick. There was not really any focus like Noah Clowney. We're looking at how he developed. But last year, it was all about the draft pick, and it was all about a lot of complaints about how the Nets were handling, the tank and their situation with them in the beginning of the season, not trading Cam Johnson, Dennis Schroeder, and Dorian Finney-Smith. The conversation at the beginning of the year was, why haven't they traded these guys? When are they going to trade these guys? We were all kind of waiting on that when they were winning too many games. It was, is this going to mess up the tank? Are they going to try to go for the play? And all of that conversation. And then later in the year, once they traded Schroeder and DFS, it became, they had that winning streak during the second half of the season. It became, why is Cam Johnson playing in this game? Why is D'Angelo Russell playing in that game? Why aren't these guys resting? When is the next injury report coming out? Who's on it? So all of that, moving from that to, getting to monitor the development of 5 first-round picks and some other young guys that you already have on the roster is far more exciting, in my opinion, and far more fun than what you got to do last year. And I think that in turn, I think they'll also finish better than they did in the lottery standings last year because you're just going to have a lot more organic losses for the reasons I outlined earlier in the episode, with having a lot of rookie ball handlers and just a lot more youth in the rotation with some of the veteran departures they had. So all of that, I think, will lend itself to, a more exciting season, even if you lose more, because you have, the tabs to keep track of all of these rookie guys and what their development looks like and how they could potentially be as long-term fits with the Nets and whether they look like they're going to have potential to be long-term rotation pieces as the Nets continue to build this out with the advantageous position they put themselves in, from an asset perspective, from a cap space perspective, all of that. So I'd expect there to be a lot of losses. I think the 20.5 number for the win projection is pretty on the nose. I'd expect the Nets to be around, those teams like the Wizards and the Utah Jazz and in that conversation. But for the first time in the Brooklyn era, you have these young guys to take a look at and to really see and potentially get excited about as guys who could be homegrown talents. First round pick, something we haven't seen much during this Brooklyn era, especially since Sean Marks has taken over. So that does it for this episode of Locked On Nets. Thank you to all of you for tuning in and supporting the show. If you do not already, be sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy my content, smash that like button, leave a comment. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. Let me know what you think about this over-under win projection at 20.5 wins. Is it too high? Is it too low? What are you rooting for? What are you trying to see throughout the year from this new look Nets roster? But I'm going to have more talk about all that. We still have more offseason stuff with the Nets having some cap space left, Cam Thomas's contract, a lot of things that still need to get done. And I'll have more coverage of all that when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.